Hey there, welcome back from spring break. Hope you had a great time. Um, at this point, I'm hoping that my substitute has handed back the quest that you took um, before we went out on break. And as I was reflecting on it, there were still some areas that I felt like we needed to master more. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to make corrections. In order to receive credit for your corrections, you must turn back in the original test and all the corrections on a separate sheet of 3-ring paper. No spiral, please. On that sheet, you should have the problem, all your work, and the final answer circled. That will be due on Thursday, March 31st at the end of class. For the next 2 days, I'm going to be covering through video teaches some of the concepts that I feel like we needed more work with, namely completing the square, quadratic formula, the discriminant. Again, the corrections are going to be due Thursday, March 31st at the end of class. To receive credit, you must have the original test, corrections on a separate sheet of paper that show the problem, demonstrate all the work steps needed, and your final answer is circled. If you don't do that, then you don't get any credit for the test at all. All right? So I want everybody to make corrections, even if you just have one correction to make. I want everybody to be submitting this in. All right? So let's start talking about completing the square. This is a technique that we've used when we wanted to solve a quadratic, i.e. find the solutions, i.e. find the x-intercepts, all right? So we want to start by moving our constant to the right. Negative 60 is our constant, so we're going to do that first. And that's going to give us x squared plus 4x is equal to positive 60. When I move it over, I change the sign. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take half of b. Half of b is the coefficient in front of the x term. In our problem here, it's the number 4. So we're going to take half of that, which is 2, and we're going to square it, which takes us coincidentally back to 4. It won't always be that way. X squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 60 plus 4. Now, step 3 tells us to factor the left-hand side. We're going to factor, and when we do, the left-hand side factors into x plus or minus a half of b, and that whole thing squared. The sign right here, the sign depends on whatever this sign is right here. It's going to match every single time. So this is going to be x plus a half of b was 2, and then we're going to square it, is equal to 64. I just added 60 and 4 together. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And on the right-hand side, I'm going to put plus or minus. I need that. That's going to give me my two answers. Remember the plus or minus. Some of you are forgetting, and so you only get one answer, and so you're not doing the problem correctly or fully. Now, whenever we take the square root of something being squared, those undo each other. So on the left, we end up with x plus 2. And on the right, that simplifies to a really nice number of 8. So we get x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus 8. Now I move the 2 over to the other side, and I get negative 2 plus or minus 8. That gives me two answers. I get x is equal to negative 2 plus 8, which is 6, and x is equal to negative 2 minus 8, which is negative 10. And in set notation, that's what it would look like. Now, we might have noticed that in doing this, we come across with a lot of fractions. So I'm going to take a brief minute before I do more examples of completing the square to multiply a number by a half, square it, and then how to add fractions. So let's start with something simple like 1/2 times 1. That one is simple. You're simply multiplying the tops together, the numerators together, and the denominators together, and you just get 1/2. When we square a fraction, it's no more than squaring the numerator, the top number, and squaring the denominator, the bottom number. And we've correctly squared 1/2, which equals 1/4. On problem number 2, you might notice that we can cancel the 2 in the numerator with the 2 in the denominator. Those become 1s, and so now we just multiply our numerators together and we multiply our denominators together. When we square it, we square our numerator, which is 1, and we square our denominator, which is 9. On this third example, we multiply our numerators together and we get 5. We multiply our denominators together and we get 4. And when we square this, we get the numerator squared, which is 5 squared, which is 25. And the denominator squared is 4 squared, which is 16. Now we also have to be able to add fractions too. We need to be able to add them to whole numbers, and we need to be able to add them to other fractions. So when we're adding fractions, one option, if you're adding it to a whole number, you could simply write it as a mixed number and then convert that mixed number into an improper fraction. And to do that, you would go 2 times 1 plus 1. 2 times 1 plus 1. And then you put that over your original denominator. On problem number 2, this is 10½ So I would get 2 times 10 plus 1. 2 times 10 plus 1 gives me 21/2. All right, another technique you could use, and this is helpful if you just have two fractions, is to find a common denominator. Now, in this particular case here, I have a common denominator of 2. So I just carry that forward as a 2. It doesn't change. I don't add my denominators together, okay? But I do add my numerators together, and I get 6/2 is 3. In problem number 4, I need to find a common denominator, which is 6. I need to multiply 2 times 3 so that I get 6. That means I have to multiply 1 times 3, so that gives me 3. And I have to multiply 3 times 2 to give me 6, so then I'm going to multiply 11 times 2. And then I add my numerators together, just like that. Now let's use it in the context of completing the square. We have to move our constant to the right. In this case, our constant is c. So I'm going to move that to the other side. And I get x squared plus x is equal to 7. Now I have to take half of b. Well, I don't see a number there. So when I don't see a number there, it's going to be a half of 1. 1/2 times 1. And that gives me a half. And when I square it, I get 1/4. So I get x squared plus 4x plus 1/4 equals 7 plus 1/4. I'm going to factor the left side into x. And it says plus or minus. I'm right here. I'm doing this step right here. This plus or minus is determined by this sign right here. If that's plus, I'm going to write a plus. And then I'm going to take half of b. Not that p squared, but just the half of b. And then I square that whole thing. And this is 7 1/4, which is 29/4. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I'm down here at step 4. Just like before, when you take the square root of something squared, you get whatever is underneath that radical. So I get x plus 1/2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 29, and the square root of 4 is 2. So now I'm going to move that plus 1/2 over, and I get x is equal to negative 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 29 over 2. And you can leave it like that, or you can write it as a single denominator, but that's just fine too. Negative 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 29 over 2. All of our examples so far have had the coefficient a, the one in front of the x squared term, as being 1. So we have to figure out what to do when a is not 1. And that's a very quick fix. You just divide every single term by a before you begin the process of completing the square. So here we have 4x squared minus 16x plus 7 is equal to 0. I'm going to divide everything by 4, which is my a. And then I'm going to move to the right at the same time. So I get dividing by 4. Get rid of this mark. And then I'm going to move the c to the right. So I get x squared minus 4x is equal to negative 7 over 4. Now I'm going to take half of b, which is 2, and I'm going to square it. It doesn't matter about the negative sign there because you're squaring it. It's always going to become plus. So if I take half of 4 and I square it and I add it to both sides. Now be careful in saying that this is 4 7/4 because this is a negative sign. So it might be easier if you just convert this side over here to a denominator of 4. That would be like option 2 that we just discussed. The left side is going to factor into x, and now what will the sign be? The sign is going to match that. And then half of b, which was 2. And then this becomes negative 7 plus 16. Technically, this 4 is over 1. So if I'm converting it to a denominator of 4, 1 times 4 is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. Okay. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. That's why we completed the square. Put a plus or minus sign in there. And I get x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 3/2. And then I'm going to add 2. X is equal to 2 plus or minus 3/2. So that's 2 plus 3/2 and 2 minus 3/2. So x is going to equal, it might be easier if you do convert this to a decimal. 2 plus 1/2 is 3.5. And then 2 minus 1/2 is 0.5 or 1/2. So it could be 7/2 and 1/2. Either way is just fine. Right? And that's it. Thanks for listening. I'll be chatting with you tomorrow. So do the worksheet and then maybe start fixing some of the problems on your quest. Remember, that is due on Thursday. The worksheet is due tomorrow. We'll grade it for a daily grade. Thanks for listening. I'll chat with you tomorrow.